we're back. Hope you had a break. Maybe you went to the Union. Maybe you went potty. But now we're back to talk about rangelands in general. So look at number 14. You're going to be distinguishing between rangelands and pastures. So we're looking at grazing here. So the difference is basically that rangelands are unfenced. So we're looking at temperate climates, possibly tropical, and animals forage on their own accord. Foraging is like hunting for plants. Pastures that are more managed, they're fenced in, and that's where farmers would send their grazing livestock to go. So the only difference really is the fence that exists or doesn't exist. So then overgrazing is when too many animals graze for too long, which kind of makes sense, right? You're losing a lot of the vegetation, which the first answer you should have is that's going to lead to erosion. Soil erosion by wind and water. You're reducing that grass cover. The animals on it like stomp down in the soil. That soil is going to become compacted, which diminishes its capacity to hold water. So maybe make a note of that. Next to soil becomes compacted. It's going to hold less water. And then you've got these invasive plant species that cattle won't eat that kind of move on in. If they don't have any, quote, predators, it's going to open up some niches for them. Examples of those invasive plant species are, let me write them, sagebrush, mesquite, if you've ever heard of that. The wood chips from mesquite are used to barbecue a lot. And actually cactus in certain areas, cacti. Okay, so what you see in front of you is basically a field where one side has been completely overgrazed and the other hasn't. So if we know that this is an issue, what can we do to manage our rangelands more sustainably? So move on here to number 16. So rotational grazing is the big one. You basically got like a big playpen fence and you move the cattle around. So these cattle are confined by this portable fencing to one area for a short time. Then they get moved to another area so that one area doesn't get completely depleted. You kind of just move them around. You can fence off areas that have already been damaged. And you can either use herbicides or controlled burning to suppress the growth of those plants you don't want, those invasive ones. This is obviously more money. It's not widely used. And as we learned yesterday, herbicides aren't necessarily a good thing. So that's a little bit about rotational grazing. About grazing in general. Let's kind of talk about land use. So when you talk about sustaining biodiversity, we got to talk about parks and nature reserves and protecting that kind of thing. I'm kind of bummed I'm missing this portion of the lecture because it's always fun to talk about where you guys have been. So let's talk national parks. National parks are definitely threatened. We're moving on to number 17. Why isn't it going? There we go. So worldwide, there's over 6,000 national parks in 120 countries. Most of them are too small to sustain most large animal species. Large animals need a lot of territory to roam. Parks in developing countries are going to have more biodiversity. However, we don't have a lot of protection against poaching. Poaching is illegally killing animals for their parts and selling them. And we don't have a lot blocking them from logging and mining. So though we have these parks set aside, there's not a lot of protection. If you look at that picture, that would be the Badlands in South Dakota. So then as you go to number 17, which asks about a major environmental threats to national parks, the biggest one in the U.S., it's a cool video, you should watch it, is popularity. Our biggest threat is people. Ooh, that looks cool. So we've got foot traffic. We've got a lot of use that's just kind of breaking down the park. We've got a lot of trail use, camping sites. Other issues are non-native invasive species. We do have some poaching. I was just listening in lunch yesterday to some boys talking about a road trip and about killing bison on their road trip, and you need a permit. So that would be poaching, commercial development, park maintenance, logging and mining, like that all goes into there. So this is where I would ask which national parks you've been to. I know you guys have been to a lot, but I'm not actually there to hear the answers. So if you would like to turn to the person next to you right now and tell them which national parks you've been to, that would be fantastic. This one right here is the Grand Tetons in Wyoming. I've been to a bunch. I've not been to that many out west. So it's Grand Teton National Park, which looks pretty much like a friggin' painting, if you ask me. So currently, if you look globally, less than 13% of our land is protected. This is number 18. Our goal, conservationist goal, is to increase it to 20, which actually seems kind of doable. But when you talk about size and design, there's definitely some important things going on. First, let's talk about a buffer zone. So we got to kind of take into account a buffer zone. You've got, think of like a target. You've got this protected inner core, like the bullseye, like on a dartboard. And then you've got these 1 or 2 buffer zones. And the buffer zones, maybe you can extract some resources, some light mining, but the inner core kind of stays untouched. And so if you kind of phase out from high dependence to low dependence on the land, that seems to protect this inner core. We also need to look at habitat corridors. Habitat corridors are basically, let's say you have this land right here, this land right here, you'd have a strip that goes between them and connects them so that animals can migrate if they need to. So it's a pretty simple idea, but our preserves, it would be great connecting them with habitat corridors. You can add habitat corridors to number 20 as well, so that kind of goes together. 19, how should they be designed and managed? You can say buffer zones and habitat corridors, and then you can define both of those for 20. There is a very specific type of land that we've designated as wilderness. Teddy Roosevelt first had this idea. He was big into recreation in natural areas and just about appreciating natural areas for their aesthetic purposes. So using them for scenic and recreational uses. So looking at number 21, the wilderness idea came about early in the 20th century and then kind of developed from there. So this is land that's officially been put aside as basically being untouched by human activities. There was an act that went along with it. We don't have a ton of land that's protected as such. The controversy is, if it's there, why can't we use it? So it's not economically useful to humans necessarily, unless people go visit. And not a lot of people use it. If you've ever been to the Chequamegon National Forest in Eagle River, the Nicolet National Forest, that's wilderness. If you've ever been to the Apostle Islands in Lake Superior, that's wilderness. In Door County, there's a wildlife refuge that I've actually never been to. That's another wilderness piece in Wisconsin. One of the first designated wilderness areas is the John Muir Wilderness in California, which is this photo, which again, like it looks, every time I look at photos like this, I think, wow, that would make a really good puzzle, because I like doing puzzles. But that's a beautiful scene with the mountains and the water. So that's untouched, basically, the trees too, by humans. I visited a wilderness area in the UP. What is it called? It starts with an S. But these trees have never been touched, and it's the first time I've ever seen like trees with trunks this big. I've never seen the sequoias or the redwoods, but it was mind-blowing. So looking at protecting biodiversity, going to number 22 now, we kind of need to focus on the hot spots. So a biological hot spot is one that has super high biodiverse plant and animal species. That's that word endemic again, found nowhere on Earth, and they're in danger of being extinct. They don't cover much of the Earth's surface, but almost half of both flowering plants and vertebrates are found there. The problem is we also have 1.2 billion people that live in these areas. So they're suffering this serious ecological disruption because of rapid human population growth. 1/5 of their population lives in these areas. So I should have kind of answered all the little questions in 22. So then to finish off, we have a map. Let's look at the map. Where are our hotspots? Are there any in the U.S.? Yep. Kind of our temperate rainforest out west. There's some in California. This would be in the Appalachian Mountains. And that's about it. Up down here, like on the Gulf. But a lot of them you can see are like rainforest kind of areas. Indonesia. Brazil. So to finish off, let's talk about what do we do with ecosystems that we've damaged. This is 23. What do we do with ecosystems that we've damaged? I'm just going to throw it all up there. So restoration, repairing the damage. Restoration in general is one option. You try to return it to its natural state. This can often be hard. Okay, you're repairing that damage caused by humans and to biodiversity and ecosystem services. Rehabilitation is another answer. You're turning it into a functional ecosystem, but not the original. So you're like replanting a clear-cut forest with the same type of trees, but now they're all going to be the same age. Replacement is replacing it with a different kind of ecosystem. So you're taking that clear-cut forest, and maybe it's going to be a pasture, or it's going to be a tree plantation with single species. And then kind of last resort are creating these artificial ecosystems. We've talked about like filling in wetlands and how that increases flooding. So we've been able to create some artificial ecosystems, like an artificial wetland, which is like a big man-made sponge in an area with lots of different plantings to reduce flooding to treat sewage. All right, so that should have been the whole reading guide. I don't think we skipped any. Message me if we did. That should have been the whole reading guide. Let me know if you have questions. People, you do have a quiz tomorrow, and it's on this stuff. I know that's not ideal. I will be there extra early if you want to review at 7. You can check my Instagram story for questions, but we're looking at chapters 10 and 12. So the forestry stuff, the rangelands, the land use, and then all that agriculture stuff. Okay, I will also be checking chapters 10 and 12 reading guide. I hope you're good for the sub. You only really had about a half-hour lecture, so now you just have some time kind of to hang out. See you tomorrow. Bye.